Oh, Captain, my Captain, welcome to week 12 of our DFS Thursday night showdown slate here at Club Fantasy FFL. Joining me, as always, Mr. Austin Amandolia, our DFS expert here, and we are going to be breaking down the Pittsburgh Steelers versus Cleveland Browns on Thursday Night Football. Stay tuned. Welcome into Oh Captain, my Captain here on Club Fantasy FFL. I am your host, Joshua Hudson. You can find me at the One Hudsonian across the socials. That is Austin Amandolia at Austin_FFL. He is our DFS expert here at Club Fantasy. And Austin, we're here to break down the week 12 Thursday night DFS showdown slate for the very gross Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Cleveland Browns. Initial thoughts on this game before we get into all the fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 37-point over under on Thursday night. What could go wrong?
You see, when you read that, you think that both teams are actually good on defense. But I promise you, people, you are going to find out that is not the case as we get through this segment. So before we hop into all that, Austin, tell everybody how they can play these Thursday night slates against us and try to beat the reigning weekly champ, this guy right here.
Yeah, if you're not a Pittsburgh fan or a Cleveland fan and are looking for a reason to watch this game, join our DraftKings League. We have a contest that runs every Thursday night where you can play the showdown slates with us. They are $2 contests, 12-person contests. So you only have to be 11 people to take it down. And I guess one of those people has to be Josh now that he's going to take down some of these contests. You can also join us for a $2 contest every Sunday for the main slate. You join the league, you get to play against us, play against other people who watch the show, who follow Club Fantasy, and ultimately get to practice DFS and the strategies we talk about on this show.
Absolutely. And of course, friendly reminder, check out our fabulous partnership with Trophy Smack and our sister site, Women of Fantasy Football. Head over to trophysmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF. And get all of your achievement-based needs. If you're playing DFS, celebrate those tournaments that you take down with a nice championship belt, ring, trophy, wall smack that you can fully customize to say, I am the greatest. All those cool things that you can get at trophysmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF. Any and all commissions we earn from this unique link, it goes towards helping us send women to these amazing opportunities with the NFL, the Super Bowl, the NFL draft, the scouting combine, all those great things. We want to be able to help them out versus just giving them passes. So get your swag at trophysmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF. All right, Austin, let's get into our first segment here. Captain Chalk. This is, of course, the chalky captain that everybody is likely to pick because they're just that damn good. Austin, we usually end up going with quarterbacks in this segment because QBs are always that, highly priced option, the most reliable option. There's a couple in this game that I think could really fit into this category, but you're going with the guy on the team that really should be winning this game, and that's going to be Russell Wilson.
Yes, I have a hard time buying into Cleveland in this matchup, and so I'm going with Pittsburgh. We've seen some underdog teams win outright here recently in the primetime games. I'm not betting on that happening in this case. It's something that I'm trying to stay a little bit more aware of. But I just don't see Pittsburgh losing this game, even though it's on the road. It seems like they're ready to roll. Russell Wilson is likely to be one of the higher rostered captains on the slate. And because he's a quarterback, he'll be pushed up because of just the sheer volume that he gets. What's interesting is I don't think this is going to be a situation where the quarterback is definitively the most rostered player. I think there's potential for one of the running backs to be more rostered than Russell Wilson because people, I think, are still probably going to be a little bit like, I don't really buy into Russell Wilson. I don't like him after his time in Denver and, go Broncos country. Let's ride all that stuff. But I think he's a good play. Like, he's been getting the volume, and I can see him actually being optimal. So I would eat the chalk here, honestly. And I think playing Russell Wilson as the chalk does open up some interesting ways to get different, because I think you can do different combinations of his pass catchers and use that as a way to get leverage on the field, especially if you're playing in smaller field contests, which is kind of what I would orient this pick towards.
That makes sense. You got to imagine that a game after the Steelers kick 6 field goals, got to find a way to score some touchdowns this week, right? Even though it's a short week, Russ has got to be able to bounce back. So, all right, well, we went go from the chalky captain to the contrarian captain. This segment is the mutineer. As mentioned, it's the contrarian captain choice that offers some variety and upside in larger tournaments. Let's stay on the Steelers side of this. Najee Harris has been pretty productive as a running back here, and he actually caught some passes last week, which is something he hasn't done much of this week. Why do you think him as an alternative to Russell Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that this game has the potential to be low scoring bodes well for Najee Harris, because it means he could score 1 or 2 touchdowns, and that may be all the touchdowns that Pittsburgh scores. Like, to your point, Josh, that you just mentioned, Pittsburgh kicked 6 field goals last week or whatever it was, and they can win that way, which is kind of what's wild about this team. So they can win a game where Najee Harris scores 2 touchdowns and Chris Boswell kicks 3 field goals. That's going to be enough to beat the Browns. I feel pretty confident in that. And I could see them just relying on him, and that pass game utilization doesn't hurt. I still feel like I'm going to be very intrigued, honestly, to see where the roster percentages do shake out in this, because I feel like people are just down on a lot of the players on the Pittsburgh side in general. And so I could see Najee Harris getting overlooked, but I think he's a solid captain. I will just shout out, if you're in especially large field stuff, I think it's worth throwing Jaylen Warren in your captain spot, or considering it, because I like the idea of playing the running backs, and it's not a 50-50 backfield. But if Jaylen Warren takes the touchdowns away from Najee Harris, then he could end up actually scoring more fantasy points. So just want to shout him out. I'm not doing it in smaller field stuff, but I think it's worth a consideration if you're playing some super large field tournament.
I like that alternative simply because I think it really is a way to get different. Cleveland's run defense over their last 3 games are only allowing about 80 rushing yards to the running back position, about 1 rushing touchdown per game. So at least there's some level of value there. Not a ton through the air. They're giving up most of their damage through the air to the wide receiver position. So while others may lean more towards Russ or George Pickens, kind of flipping the script a little bit, especially if they're able to get up early and they just ride Najee out to kind of close out the game and he's able to rush in a touchdown. I agree with you. It's a way to get different. On the flip side to this, another alternative captain, one of my favorites on this, been a big Cedric Tillman fan for a couple of years now, just with what I felt he was able to do in this offense if given the opportunity. I've mentioned so far, Jameis Winston has been slinging it, and there's a reason why Cedric Tillman is doing what he's doing. Why do you like him more as a kind of a contrarian choice over maybe his other pass catching mates, a la Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, even potentially David Njoku?
Yeah. Well, so on the David Njoku front, it's just that it's a bad matchup. Like, Pittsburgh has been doing really well at shutting down opposing tight ends from a fantasy perspective. It's honestly, it's also a little bit of just a game theory move, like thinking that people might move towards Jerry Jeudy after what we just saw from him last week. It actually might help Cedric Tillman go a little bit overlooked and be lower and have a lower rostership. And so I want access to that. And I think oftentimes I think people can default to like putting a player in the captain spot that is on the team they think is going to win. And like I already said, I don't think Cleveland's winning this game. I'm still interested in putting Cedric Tillman in as my captain spot, because I could see him being the highest scoring fantasy player in this matchup and losing this game, because he has a potential that I think very few other players have in this matchup of getting 10 catches, getting 100 yards, and scoring a touchdown. That amount of volume and that amount of productivity could easily make him the highest scoring player on the slate, especially if like Najee Harris rushes this for a touchdown, maybe Russell Wilson throws the touchdown pass to Pat Freiermuth, and then Chris Boswell kicks 2 or 3 field goals. None of those guys are going to score more than Cedric Tillman. And so I'm intrigued by putting Cedric Tillman in my captain spot and then filling the rest of my roster with Pittsburgh Steelers players, because again, I think that they're going to be the ones that dominate in this matchup.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think even really any of those Browns guys can be viable contrarian picks, truthfully. I mean, we saw what Jerry Jeudy was able to do last week. Elijah Moore's seeing pretty solid, healthy target share himself. So, I mean, some of these guys are going to be more expensive, obviously. So if you go a little bit cheaper on that captain spot, it allows you to fit some of the more expensive options in the flex. Speaking of the flex, let's talk about the first mates, because every captain needs a reliable crew. These are going to be the standouts that help maximize your lineups. We talked on Wednesday's NPI about Ryan's love for George Pickens and how he's going to score 2 touchdowns this week because Cleveland's pass defense is god-awful. What do you like about George Pickens as a flex option here on Thursday Night Football?
Well, I do also like that Cleveland's defense of their defensive receivers is not great. They've allowed an average of 36 DraftKings points per game to the position over the past 4 weeks, which is a 3-game sample size for Cleveland. So that bodes pretty well. That ranks in the bottom 10 of the league. They're giving up a decent amount of points. The other thing about George Pickens is he just is getting such a ridiculous volume of targets compared to everyone else in the Pittsburgh offense. The next closest player in terms of targets in this offense is Pat Freiermuth, and it is a wild gap. According to PFF, George Pickens has 75 targets. Pat Freiermuth, second most targeted player on the team, 34 targets. He has a ridiculous proportion of the yards. George Pickens has 728 of Pittsburgh's receiving yardage. The next highest player is also Pat Freiermuth at 295. It's almost a 5. It's a
very centralized offense.
Yes, we know who the ball is going to. They're going to run the ball to Najee Harris. Then they're going to play action, get the ball to George Pickens. So it's really that simple. I think also we didn't talk about him in the captain spot. I think he's also a really interesting captain this week, just for the volume reasons. I think he's just going to be steamed up. So I will say that I like the idea of pivoting elsewhere, but he also could very well be chalk worth eating at the captain spot. But if you don't, I think having him in a flex position is also perfectly fine.
I think your next flex option here, I think, is if the tides kind of shift and stay on the tracks that they were last week, where this offense just can't move and score touchdowns. So they're just going to kick a bunch of field goals with Chris Boswell. What are we liking, or really not liking, I guess, with Chris Boswell?
Yeah, I mean, he's demonstrated like he can kick field goals consistently. Yeah. So there's that. Honestly, it's also just about the game environment. Like, it seems like a low total, or it is a low total. So it seems like it's going to be low scoring, 37-point total. Because of that, there might not be a ton of fantasy points to go around. And I think the thing that kind of sticks out to me is, like, if you're looking at Chris Boswell, if he kicks 2 40-yard field goals and gets 2 extra points, that's 10 fantasy points right there for a kicker. At that point, like, am I really going to look to some third string receiver and hope that they get me 10 points on either of these offenses? Maybe on the Cleveland side. Maybe that's possible because the pass volume is there. On the Pittsburgh side, I don't know. Like, Calvin Austin, he can maybe have a 20-point game if he scores a touchdown, but he could probably also just as easily have a 5-point game, probably more likely a 5-point game. And so it's really just like, what's the opportunity cost here? Like, Chris Boswell could easily give me like 10 points. And even if they are ahead, like, this team isn't one that's going to be like, 4th and 3 at the 48-yard line. Yeah, let's go for it. The 38-yard line. They'll kick it. Like, that's just, I think that's the way they're going to function. And so that's going to play in the favor of the kicker. And I think they win. So I'm a fan of having Chris Boswell in my lineup. I could see arguments elsewhere, but I would definitely look at him as someone that could be really reliable.
Yeah, something I've noticed with teams, really more so this year probably than years past, when you have a kicker that has demonstrated reliability, you end up not going for it as often on like 4th and shorts. And, if you're in that range, it's just like, we trust our guy. We're going to take the points, and we're going to play good defense. And that's what the Steelers have done this year. They played good defense, and they've shown that they can rely on Boswell because he's nailing the kick. So, yeah, I like that pick. So let's talk about some of these cheaper punt play options. These would be the deck scrubbers that can make a lineup based on one play limited opportunity. You talked a little bit about Calvin Austin in that last segment. Could be 20 points, could be 5 points. That's kind of what you're getting in this section, folks. But you know what? That 5 points could also be 6 because it could be a return touchdown for Calvin Austin, right? Let's call a spade here, Austin.
Yeah, well, and the thing I like about Calvin Austin is he actually plays kind of a similar role as George Pickens can in terms of like the downfield targets. And they've been trying to get Calvin Austin the ball downfield. It's happened multiple times because I've been playing him in some DFS lineups here lately on the main slate, and so I've watched those near chunk plays go the wrong way, but it can always happen. And I think because of the utilization, he's definitely a very high ceiling player. He's worth a consideration. Like if he has a 50-yard touchdown, which is very viable, especially with the style of offense Russell Wilson likes to play, he could very easily be in the optimal captain spot. And we'll talk about this later, but it's also back to that idea of opportunity cost here. Like I could play Calvin Austin and get anywhere from 6 to 16 points, or I could play the Pittsburgh Steelers defense and probably get like 4 points because of the nature of defensive scoring on DraftKings. So I'm a fan of Calvin Austin there. I'm also a fan of Pat Freiermuth, the tight end. And honestly, I was shocked to see how closely priced Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington are on this slate.
Surprising.
Yeah, it's like not as big of a difference as I would have hoped for. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go with Pat Freiermuth instead of Darnell Washington, just because I think he is a little bit more reliable. Now, if you look at stats about Cleveland against tight ends over recent weeks, it's going to look a little bit weird depending on how the provider of that data is counting Taysom Hill. Because if he is being counted as a tight end, as he is in my system, the Cleveland Browns have allowed an average of 33.5 points per game to the tight end position over their last 3 games. That is almost entirely because Taysom Hill went freaking nuts last week. Before that, they did allow a touchdown to Mark Andrews. He went like 5 for 50. That's pretty good. Like if Pat Freiermuth did that, that's good. I do think Mark Andrews is a little better than Pat Freiermuth, but Taysom Hill is definitely steaming up the numbers to make Cleveland look bad. But I still think Freiermuth or Darnell Washington are a good pick, but I lean to Freiermuth just because it's not enough of a cost savings for Darnell Washington for me to warrant going to the tight end 2 on this team.
Yeah, and I mean, again, when you're weighing pricing here, Pat Freiermuth is the second target on this offense. So even if that second target is way down here compared to Pickens way up here, there's still going to be more value in that when it only costs you maybe $1,000 more, if that, right? So yeah, I like that. Friendly reminder, you can play these DFS contests with us at Club Fantasy. Hit the link in the description on the video on YouTube, or if you're watching over on Spotify or Apple or listening wherever it is, the link is there in the description. All right, favorite category, final one, the Kraken. These are the lineup traps that sink the ship. Talked a little bit about defense, Austin. Tell us why they are the trap that is sinking this ship.
Yeah, I think in this game in particular, it is going to be particularly tempting to put a defense in the captain spot. People do it every week, and you know how people do it every week, because if you play these and you track them throughout the game, you'll notice that right when the game starts, it's like, wow, why do these teams have 25 points already? It's because they decided, oh, we're playing both defenses, bad strategy, and we're putting one of them in the captain spot, also bad strategy. Think back to what we were talking about earlier. If defenses start with 10 points, if they give up a touchdown, it drops down to like 4 points immediately. Like that's the jump on DraftKings. It's a huge jump between allowing no points and allowing some points. I think both defenses are going to allow at least a touchdown. They're probably going to allow at least 10 points apiece. That's going to knock them down. And to have them in the captain spot, you need to have a weird anomaly game for that to ever work. They need to score probably not just one defensive touchdown, but like 2 or 2 defensive touchdowns worth of points. So like 6 sacks and a turnover plus a touchdown. Like that's the level of performance, and you need all the offensive players to fail. I just don't see that happening in this matchup. I think it's going to feel tempting because it's like, oh, it's a 37-point over under. But like that means that Pittsburgh is projected to score 20 points and Cleveland's projected to score 17. That's still a decent amount of points in terms of how it impacts the scoring output of fantasy defenses. So I would shy away from that. I think it's fine to have one of them in the flex position, probably Pittsburgh. Like if you're putting Najee Harris as your captain, might not be a bad idea to pair him with Pittsburgh, the defense in the flex spot, because you're correlating them. You're betting on, oh, they're going to run the ball and the Pittsburgh defense is going to smash in this game, and they're going to control what's happening when Cleveland is on the field. So that I can get, but I would be careful buying into this idea that a defense in the captain spot is going to be optimal.
So let's turn the attention to the it's the right word I'm looking for. The polarizing Justin Fields here. We've seen him get a little bit more run as a runner, but still not really enough to justify what I'm guessing is a much higher price, really. Usually the backup quarterbacks are in that 6,000 range on DraftKings for these showdown slates.
Yeah, and Justin Fields actually, I think, was steamed up a little bit too in pricing. I'm gonna we'll do a little multitasking here and look it up while I talk about this. But my big concern here about Justin Fields, Justin Fields is the third most expensive player in this matchup.
What? DraftKings is so high. I want what they're smoking.
He is more expensive than Jameis Winston.
That's asinine.
$200 less expensive than Russell Wilson in the flex spot.
Dear Lord.
So
that doesn't scream trap. I don't know what does. Unless DraftKings and the books know that Russell Wilson is getting hurt in this game, this is a crazy fucking price.
Yeah, exactly. So like for this to work out, you're betting on an injury, which is a bad thing to bet on. You can't predict that. Secondly, like I do think he could end up getting like a weird amount of rostership. Like if he had 5% rostership in this matchup, it wouldn't surprise me because I think people could be like, well, he was on the field. He was on the field last week. They brought him in crucial short yardage situations where they needed a first down. Maybe they do that in the red zone and he scores a touchdown and all of a sudden
But even then, you would need him to score like 3 touchdowns to pay off that price.
Yeah, exactly.
It's wild to me.
It's a bad idea. Don't do it. Unless we get news.
Austin. Don't do it.
Unless we get news at like 7:45 that Russell Wilson broke his ACL, tore his ACL in warmups. Then don't do it.
The only way that happens is if its ego is what got broke. Jesus Christ. All right. With that, this has been Oh Captain, My Captain for week 12 here on Club Fantasy. Friendly reminder once again, show some love to our sister site, Women of Fantasy Football, and their partnership with Trophy Smack. Head over to trophysmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF. Show some love to the ladies and help us continue to grow the process of getting more women involved in sports media. For Austin, at Austin_FFL, myself, Joshua Hudson, at the One Hudson, and you, of course, can follow Club Fantasy across the socials at Club Fantasy FFL, the URL, clubfantasyffl.com. Be sure to stay tuned to the website on Saturday morning when Austin drops the A-list. Those would be his cash game picks for the Week 12 main slate. There are 6 teams on bye this week, people. Might be some names you probably don't recognize, and that's okay, because Austin's going to tell you why you should be paying attention to him. With that, see ya, sayonara. We will see everybody next week.